In focus this evening, the glitch that could short-circuit cyberspace.
On New Year's Day, 2000, is it possible that we're in for an international disaster because so many of the world's computers will be utterly confused by what date it is?
At the close of the 20th century, a tiny computer glitch threatened to disrupt nearly every aspect of modern life.
It's called the Y2K, or year 2000 bug. It's a problem that some fear could cripple the nation.
Everyone knows failure of Uncle Sam's computers would be chaos. Glitches in the air traffic control system, breakdowns in oversight of nuclear plants and weapons.
Government is not a little behind, but way behind.
Tremendously behind. The wake-up call is now.
Tony Keys in this morning's USA Today. As we read earlier, Ed Kelly, who is a Fed governor, says it's very probable we will have some problems, but my hope and my best expectations is that those problems will be transitory and will be contained. What's he talking about?
Well, he's talking about the year 2000 problem and its potential impact on the economy. And there's two impacts, really. One is a direct impact where the problem itself could manifest in our systems and therefore be disruptive and disrupt transactions on Wall Street, banking transactions as financial transactions are conducted around the world today, which they are constantly. But the other impact is the sort of implied impact. How does the market respond to this potential threat? And that's one that's a little more difficult to manage. And Ed Kelly's got a very difficult job because he has to balance the two. He has to make certain that people understand this is a very serious problem they can't ignore, they have to do something about it. On the other hand, he certainly doesn't want to panic people and have them respond in some untoward manner without warrant. So he's got a tough job. In February, he said to a meeting he addressed down in Florida, International Bankers Association, that the stakes were enormous, actually nothing less than the preservation of a safe and sound financial system. So there's no question that this is a big deal. The question is now, how will it actually be taken care of and when?
The subject is Y2K for the next 2.5 hours, so if you want to dial up and tell us what your problems are or ask questions of our guests, please do so at the moment. You see the lines on the screen divided between the East and the West. And I want to ask Ed Marr, who is the partner here of our guest up top, what are you doing downstairs?
Well, Brian, good morning.
Morning.
What we've tried to do is maybe help folks understand a little bit the nature of the problem. So we've got a little computer 101 that we can run through, and maybe in 90 seconds or less we can sort of tell you what happens inside a computer and then tell you what the nature of the problem. It's really, it seems real simple. It's 2 digits missing, and probably the hardest thing for people to grasp is how those missing 2 digits of the century could cause the kind of effects we've been talking about.
Before we do that, let me just ask you, how did you and your partner up here, Tony Keys, get together in the first place to do all this?
Well, you know, we've been friends for 15 years or more, and another good friend of mine brought the problem to me a little over 3 years ago, and I tried to go do a bunch of research and prove that person wrong. And as I did the research, I only became more and more concerned, and I brought it to Tony's attention, and he did the same thing. He went off and did his own research and to try to prove me wrong, and we both came to the conclusion over breakfast one morning that this was an inescapable problem, and that someone had to shine a brighter light on it, and so we decided it was going to be us.
Tony Keys, what is your business?
Well, now it's talking exclusively about this problem through programs like this, speaking engagements, writing. Ed and I pretty much have devoted full time to it. We do a radio show here in Washington, D.C. on Mondays and Fridays called the Y2K Advisor. And we have experts, politicians, people who are actually dealing with the problem on the show. We take callers from the local area and try to help people understand this, understand what the problem is, where we are with it.
Let's have Ed Marr take us through this 90-second little background piece, and then we'll go to calls for the next 2 hours and 20 minutes. Go ahead, Ed Marr.
Well, thank you, Brian. And really, what is hard to understand about a computer, and it really applies to all computers, from the computer that's on your watch, to the computers in your home and these laptops, to the biggest computers in the world, the mainframes and the mega computers. They're really all the same at heart. And a computer doesn't know an A from a B, from a 1, from a 2. The only thing a computer really does is measure tiny differences in voltage at specific points. And it gives a representation to them of 0 or 1. And that's all that ever happens inside a computer, is a representation of a DC voltage, and it's really only plus or minus 0.5 volts. And as it measures those, it assigns a value of 0 or 1 to it. And then what we do as human beings, we start assigning intelligence to those differentials in O's and 1s. As you see on the screen, that's the ASCII representation of an A inside a computer. It's simply the changes in state between O's and 1s.
We can't see anything there. I'm not sure whether we're going to be able to or not. If not, we probably, there we go.
Okay. Well, again, the A's, an A is simply represented as a 8-character O's and 1s. Z is another 8 characters. And what we call the Tinkerbell principle, it all becomes very understandable if you just are willing to accept, on faith for most people, that we can check whether a electrical current is either a 0.5 voltage high or low billions of times every second. That's the part that most people have the hardest part accepting or understanding, is that we can do this inside a computer millions and now billions of times every second. So we can run a whole bunch of things through that computer.
Let me ask you this: how many rules do you have to show us?
Well, like I said, that's the basics of what you need to know about inside a computer. That's what it looks like inside a computer. That's unintelligible to any human being. The computer is simply looking at zeros and ones. What we've done as human beings is we've applied computer logic, and that again is at the root of all computer logic, is the if-then-else logic. If a certain condition exists or if it's true, then you perform a certain instruction and test again, and you keep on doing that until the condition's no longer true, and then you go to the next instruction. And that underlies, again, all computer systems and the logic.
Let me do this, because callers have the best questions on this program. Let me go to the calls and find out what their concerns are, and then we'll bring you in as we go through this next 45 minutes. Plattsburgh, New York, you're on the line. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi.
My question is, why, with such brilliant scholars at MIT, RPI, and some of our space scientists, we're wringing our hands over this problem, and they haven't been able to solve it as yet, and why are we blaming Vice President Gore for everything?
Thanks. Tony Keys.
Well, that's a great question to start with, actually. It allows me to say that this really isn't a technical problem. You know, we're not hoping that someone, some genius is going to pop out of a closet somewhere and say, I've got it, this is the answer, everything's going to be okay. We actually know how to solve this problem. It's not technically difficult. Where we are now, with 16 months to go, is we have this enormous amount of effort that we've got to put in this thing in a period of time that doesn't allow us to get to everything. We have over 700 billion lines of code to deal with and over 50 billion microchips. And it's just a problem of having enough resources and time to deal with it. Had we started back in 1990 aggressively, we would be done.
Tony Keys is a native of Dayton, Ohio, and went to Ohio University, where he graduated in 1974. Las Vegas, Nevada, your comment or question?
Yes, my comment is this. I am a manufacturer of hard disk drives and PCBs, printed circuit boards, right? The majority of our companies are in Japan. Clean rooms happen to be in the Philippines. But this particular problem that you're talking about reminds me of the savings and loans problem, when all the money disappeared. And to me, it seems like this is exactly a setup that the American people are going to go through.
Set up by who?
My advice, if you have money in the bank coming the year 2000, put it in a coffee can or a big box and bury it, because there's going to be a transference of money once again, just like the saving and loan scandal.
All right, let me just go to Ed Marr, because there are articles that suggest there's only 2 weeks' supply of money for everything that people need in this country, and if everybody goes to the bank, we're in trouble. What's your response to that?
Well, yeah, we sure hope that people don't consider that as an option. That's a real bad idea. But what it's going to take to avoid that is some real candor. As Tony likes to say, people can't panic for 16 months. So if there was some real candor about the nature of the problem and where the bumps and turns in the road were going to be, I think the idea of people panicking and starting to take money out of banks and hoard supplies, and we're beginning to hear more and more of that, by the way, that wouldn't occur. But when we hear these continual rosy forecasts, and that despite really some rational look at the situation, you're sort of setting yourself up for what this gentleman is suggesting, is that right towards the end, if when things start going bad, people might panic. So we're real hopeful that we'll get shine as much light as possible on this situation, and I think collectively we can take care of the worst of it.
Ed Marr is a graduate of the University of Dayton in Ohio and is a Brooklyn, New York native. We go to Athens, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Actually, I got 3 questions now. First one is, how far along is the government as far as their processes to be done? I would assume that the government is, they're still trying to get their vacuum tubes working.
Hold on right there, Mr. Keyes.
Well, later in this program, you'll want to stick around, because John Koskinen will be on. He's effectively the president's czar on this problem in dealing with this, and specifically for the federal government. But also Congressman Horn, who follows me on this program, has been doing some oversight on the government. The government's own report on itself says that there are about a half a dozen agencies that are in serious, serious trouble. The rest are somewhere in between. There's one shining star, that's Social Security. That should make people feel pretty good. I think that's a big concern, but Social Security is doing a great job.
Here's that report card that Mr. Horn has issued, and the Social Security Administration gets A+. The Transportation Department, at least when this came out, is at the bottom with an F. What's your second question, please?
Well, the second question is, I would assume that being in the American economy and with capitalism supreme and what have you, that some entrepreneurial folks will develop methods that can mass convert these outdated programs.
Hold it right there. Ed Marr, your reaction to that?
Well, there are literally hundreds, and now we're beginning to see thousands of very bright entrepreneurial folks coming up with pieces to the puzzle.
Are you part of that?
No, afraid not. Wish we were, but no. What we're trying to do is try to help assess some of these new procedures, these new techniques. Some are excellent. Others, you have to wonder about the intent of the people putting them out. I do believe there's going to be a whole bunch of charlatans, silver bullet experts, people trying to sell quick and dirty solutions that won't work. And so what we're trying to do is just shine some light on the ones that are professionally developed and actually do help automate the part of the problem that is susceptible to that. But the bottom line, Brian, is that you can only automate so much of this process. The rest of it needs people, time, computer resources, and those are all in short supply.
Third question, sir.
You just hit it earlier. I think the most serious aspect of this thing is the psychology of a bank run and the problems that could cause, with as much ignorance as there is about computers and about the way our economy and banking works. What in the world are they doing to prevent that? And I thank you, Brian, for your time, and I wanted to apologize for that yahoo that yelled at you earlier. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Tony Keyes, your reaction to this call.
Well, these are great calls, actually. They allow us to get right to the heart of the matter. There will be no silver bullet to solve this problem, because there isn't any single solution that can do it. It's just far too complex. So it's important for the American people to, if they hear that, to just ignore it. Bill Gates can't solve this problem. No individual can. It's just too complex. I guess the other thing in terms of these solutions, they are important, they are helpful. We do have some excellent tools out there, but they only solve a relatively small portion of the problem. The biggest problem with this issue is testing. And testing isn't something you can schedule. It takes as long as it takes.
Seattle, Washington, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning. We hear the talk about the Y2K in terms of the U.S. government, the market, and our economy. But I'm wondering what will happen to foreign governments and economies. Say, I mean, the Asian market is very weak, and we depend a lot about that. We talk about how the Asian market's going to affect the U.S. market. Do people think about foreign countries?
Ed Marr, all the articles I've read on this say that everybody is behind us, including some of the third world countries don't have a clue as to where this is all going. What's your reaction?
Well, again, with a few notable exceptions, the UK, Canada, and Holland, and the Netherlands, those folks. But when you get into Germany, France, Italy, you run into folks who are pretty well preoccupied with the conversion to the euro. And really very, very little serious attention has been spent with dealing with the year 2000. They're really focused on that. And when you get outside of the developed countries and you get into South America and the like, it's really very, very troubling what we're seeing there. Another thing that's really very troubling is in Japan and the Pacific Rim. And it's harder to explain maybe their preoccupation with their economic condition, but they are very, very far behind. And as Tony can describe to you, the economic impact, the ripple effect, if you will, of their economies faltering over this is real troubling to us.
West Hartford, Connecticut, you're next.
Oh, good morning, Brian, and thank you very much for C-SPAN.
Welcome.
First-time caller.
Nice to have you.
For a long time, I've thought that the problem was as simple as changing a 2-digit date code to a 4-digit code, or for the year, that is. And from what Tony said earlier, it seems like maybe that is the magnitude of the change that needs to be made. I don't understand why a computer program couldn't be created that could be sent to people or acquired so that that could be corrected, sort of like a virus detection program.
Thanks. Tony.
Well, you know, some of what you're saying is true. You know, there are more complex manifestations of this problem than others. On personal computers that people use at home, all they do perhaps is word processing, maybe a couple of other simple things on their computer. They're not going to experience as significant a problem as others are. You can go up on the web today and get patches for some of your operating systems and your applications. There will be some hardware effort in something that's called the BIOS, which is the kind of the central nervous system of a computer, the traffic cop that manages where information goes. And then your applications, whatever, or your data, whatever you've developed over the years and stored, that also has to be dealt with. But the more complex issue today is the systemic nature of this problem. You can have hundreds of computers that interact with one another. You have to get all of those 100% and all of their interfaces done and tested in order to deal with the problem. So it's really the complexity, the scope of the problem, and the interconnectedness that's really the issue.
Los Osos, California, you're next.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mac, and I've got a Macintosh. Now, I understand that the Macintoshes themselves aren't really that susceptible to this problem. What about the programs that have been written for them? And secondly, the company I work for, Gary Player Golf, they use a lot of credit cards in their business. And how well are the credit card companies doing?
Ed Marr.
Well, you're right. The Mac doesn't have this problem because it calculates dates differently, and so they don't have the ROM BIOS problem that exists in the PC world. However, if, as I do, I also use a Mac. I use products from other companies such as Microsoft and the like. In those programs, you will still find dates that are stored as 6 characters with the century date just assumed. And so you will have problems running those programs on your Mac. So you're not home free. In terms of the credit cards, they're making great strides in fixing those problems for couple of years now, they have avoided issuing cards that have a 00 or a 01 expiration date. But now many of the major systems have been corrected so that they can, in fact, automatically accept a 0001 expiration date. But you still see all sorts of instances where systems haven't been corrected and they will reject those credit cards.
Hudson, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning, Brian.
Hi.
Just first time call. I'm a little nervous. I'd like to know if you go to your bank or your stockbroker and ask them, are they geared up for this change, and they tell you no, what would happen to your money, and should you take it out then?
Thanks. Tony Keys.
I absolutely guarantee you won't go to anyone who will tell you no today. What you'll get are platitudes. We're working very hard on this. We believe we're going to get this problem solved. Businesses have, they really have a conundrum. To tell you the absolute truth, even if it's good news, presents a liability for them today. They can actually be sued if they misrepresent the situation in positive terms or in negative terms. And so corporate counsel has been telling entities, look, just don't talk about this thing. If you have to talk about it, give them generalities, talk in vague terms about how you're applying lots of effort to this, lots of money, you know it's serious, but you're very confident you're going to take care of it. So you're not going to hear, unfortunately, that they can't deal with it or they're behind. What you have to do, I think, is read every single article you see in the paper. Don't let another one go by. Educate yourself on this. That's the best solution. Ultimately, you're going to have to decide as an individual where you come down on this, because it's very polarized. You'll hear from some people that this is not a problem at all, and yet you'll hear from others that this is coming Armageddon.
Ed Marr, how long did you spend with IBM?
No, I was never with IBM. I was an IBM systems programmer with a series of companies here in the Washington area. But I worked on a mainframe computer, actually sort of ran one and did systems programming in the IBM environment, which is a very specific, peculiar environment. And that's where a lot of this problem exists.
Glendale, Arizona. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I have one question. Why would they still be selling these computers now? Is it safe to buy a PC right now? Does it still have that built-in problem? And you can't get a straight answer from any of these guys when you go shopping for one.
Ed Marr?
Yeah, you know, I was just reading last night, Brian, where several government agencies were buying computers off of government contracts as recently as this year that, when tested, failed. The explanation to that, Brian, is simply that the chips that go up to make up a PC or a computer tend to be generic. So
I've got a board here. I don't know if you can look on your screen. Is this what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Is that what is this, a chip? Yeah, it says chip right on. I guess that's the chip.
That's a CPU, I believe you're pointing at. The pieces to the right are typically memory locations and memory storage locations, right? And the pieces to the left are the CPU, and there's a piece in there that has a ROM BIOS, which are the initial instructions that tell a computer what it is. We tell where the monitor is, how do you address it, to understand when you hit a key what that means. Things like that are built into the ROM BIOS. And the ROM, they get, since every computer you're pointing at, the pieces to the right are typically memory locations and memory storage locations, right? And the pieces to the left are the CPU, and there's a piece in there that has a ROM BIOS, which are the initial instructions that tell a computer what it is. We tell where the monitor is, how do you address it, to understand when you hit a key what that means. Things like that are built into the ROM BIOS. And the ROM, they get, since every computer does essentially the same things, those become generic. And so they get delivered in hundreds of thousands and millions at a time, and are stored not quite this way, but are stored just literally in bins sometimes. And so when new ones came in, some people didn't quite always understand that they had to be segregated from old ones, and essentially on an assembly line you pick up next chip and you insert it and you test it and it runs. So you had this mixing of ROM BIOS chips that were Y2K compliant and ones that are not. So it's not uncommon to still be able to find machines out there today on the shelves that are not Y2K compliant, but more and more now they are.
Hudson, New Hampshire, you're next.
Hiya.
Hi.
I've been programming computers professionally for almost 30 years, and I'm full-time engaged at the company where I work in fixing this problem. So I'd like to make a comment from the inside of the software profession. The big question to me is, how do we change the way software is done after we get over this hump? Now, there is, for example, just to state the problem very simply, there is no generally accepted handbook of professional practices in software, as there is in almost every other technical profession nowadays. The basic reason for that, if you go back through several layers of cause and effect, the basic reason for that is that a programmer sitting at his terminal at his desk has to put himself inside the computer into a very mechanical, imaginative state of mind, and that's very difficult, and it's very individual, and it's very much like an individual craftsman, very hard to standardize.
Tony Keys.
Well, you know, this allows us to get to the heart of the problem. This is an economic problem. It's a managerial problem. It is not a technical problem.
How much is it going to cost? Is that $600 billion figure right worldwide?
Well, that's an estimate of the direct cost. They actually estimate that the legal expense will be more than that, somewhere around $1 trillion. But this allows us to talk a little bit about why we have this problem in the first place, why we didn't deal with it. And it's because it's a very expensive problem to deal with. For one, this issue that our caller's talking about illustrates the competitive marketplace. Everyone wants to be different. They want to have a competitive edge. Standardization homogenizes the marketplace. It's tough to differentiate yourself if you're standardized. So the market wants to have unique products, and that's been something we've been dealing with for decades. Now, when this issue came up in budget meetings year after year after year, the projects that got funded were those that were strategic or cost-saving, were bug fixes. The year 2000 problem went to the bottom of the list because you get nothing back except the right to be in business on January 1st, 2000. Now, for a business executive, that's unacceptable. And so the problem just kept dropping off the list over and over again. Maybe the good news on the other side of this, which is what our caller's suggesting, is that this problem is going to act like a digital forest fire. That which has not been dealt with before January 1st, 2000 will basically be burnt away, and we'll have new software, perhaps new architectures, new techniques, better maintenance.
How long were you general manager of government systems, Stratacom Corporation?
4 years.
In this town?
Yes.
Orange County, California. Go ahead, please.
Got me a little bit nervous when you were talking about the bank runs, and I got to thinking that this problem could participate a big stock market withdrawal of stocks and people selling off, and I got to thinking that it might be a good idea to maybe put a freeze on trading during the first day until we know whether or not this is going to be a huge problem, so investors don't just say, well, I don't know whether or not this is going to be a massive problem, but just to be safe, I'm going to pull my, liquidate my assets for the day, and then if it's not a problem, then I'll put it back in. So,
thanks, caller. Let me ask Ed Marr to respond to that.
Well, the Securities Industry Association and the various stock exchanges have been very, very aggressive and out front on this subject. Matter of fact, about a month ago, they conducted the first of what they call street-wide tests. That was just testing the test. They're going to do it again here this month, and then they're going to circulate the effects of that and come do it again next year. But they believe that they will be able to end-to-end transact stock buys and sells come the year 2000, and they are. Those people have their headlights way on, and they do appreciate that they are not in business. They are out of business. The stock market essentially won't operate without these computers working flawlessly, which is what they do now. So they're another group that has really spent untold amounts of money and time and effort early, and I would say they have a fairly good shot at being up and running.
Ed Marr and Tony Keys, our guests, to the bottom of the hour. They host their own radio show here on WWRC radio station, and they have their own organization called Y2K Enterprises, Inc., Bedford, Indiana. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian. How you doing?
Welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen. I basically have two questions. One is embedded systems. What exactly do you think is going to happen to our embedded systems, such as microwave ovens, traffic lights, electronic ignition on your car? How are they going to react? And the other thing is let's say there's not a problem at all. It's just fake. There's going to be enough hype build up. The sheer hype of people into panic getting closer to the year, and then the after effects after the year's changed over is going to be totally chaotic. I just wanted you to comment about that.
Tony Keys.
Number one, let's deal with the second question that you asked. This is not fake. It may be hyped in some sectors, but this is a real problem. It's going to cause real problems. Assistant Secretary of Defense John Harmay testified earlier this year before the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I can't quote verbatim, but I'll paraphrase it. He said, "I would be the last one to suggest that we're not going to have some nasty surprises, because I think we will. This is going to manifest itself in ways on the American people and the world at large that we can't even comprehend." So there really is no question that we've got a very serious problem. Now, the embedded systems issue is one that's really one of the thorniest ones to deal with. It's not one that people generally appreciate is a problem. There are kind of two kinds of computer systems. One uses software. That's the kind that you think of with a PC or a mainframe computer. But microchips, kind of the invisible computers that run our automated world, that's where the problem is also manifested. Much more difficult to deal with. Harder to find the problem. The testing to determine whether or not you have a problem is tough. We've got over 50 billion to deal with. And then solving the problem is also difficult. You know, on this printed circuit board that we looked at earlier, in some instances, it will be as simple as changing out the software. In others, you'll be able to pull out a chip like this and replace it in you know, a plug-compatible way. But there are some instances where you won't have either of those options, and you'll have to actually redesign the software. That's going to be very expensive and time-consuming.
Girard, Ohio, on our Y2K special all morning long. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I had a question. Aren't there institutions that have a vested interest in not solving this problem? Institutions that have contracts that run out in 2000, institutions that owe money. Could you address that, please?
Ed Marr.
There are, but I can't see any real benefit to anyone based on that. I think there will be companies whose problems are so overwhelming, the economics are so dicey, that they will choose to go into some form of bankruptcy or protection as opposed to solving it. But I'm sure that'll be the minority of cases. And like any situation, any natural disaster or the like, there'll be people who will see it and take advantage of it, and I'm sure that'll happen. But believe me, at least here in the U.S., I think finally we have folks' attention, and a lot of them are doing their best efforts. We've just waited too long.
Steve Horn of the Congress, Republican congressman from California, will join us in a few moments, and then Don Koskinen, who is the chair of the President's Y2K Forum. Let's go to Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to address the issue that a gentleman earlier mentioned about the banks, comparing banks to the savings and loans. The savings and loan issue, the comparison is very faulty. Very simple. The savings and loan issue was due to deregulation, primarily caused by a misunderstanding that they just didn't understand how to gauge interest rate risk. Between that and making faulty loans, the S&L set themselves up for failure. The gentleman suggesting that banks are going to go through the same issue and people should therefore withdraw money at the end of 1999 would basically be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I work for a bank, and I'm involved very heavily in the Y2K issue. And the banking industry as a whole has spent billions of dollars preparing for the Y2K.
Are you solving the problem?
Yes. Yeah, I firmly believe we are. I know our bank is a smaller bank. We're only about $1 billion bank. But the systems that we've purchased and every system we have are all having to be Y2K compliant or be forced to be Y2K compliant. The banking industry is very regulated on this issue.
All right, thanks. Tony Keys.
Well, we're very fortunate here in the U.S. to have very powerful regulators, and we are in good shape in our banking system. The Fed has made it very clear that they won't wait for January 1st, 2000 for a failure to occur. They're monitoring these banks through auditors and examiners, and if they find that a bank is off schedule, they'll close that bank down. So I agree with this caller. I kind of thought that the point that earlier caller was making was simply having to do with the cost of this problem. Unfortunately, you know, it's the little guy that's going to bear the burden for this. We're going to pay a fortune for this problem eventually, and it's going to come as a shock. It's going to come in one fell swoop again, as opposed to being managed over decades. And so, unfortunately, I agree with him on that front. We're going to have a very expensive problem here to deal with.
Los Angeles, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, you were saying that, you know, if we had thought of solving this problem back in 1990, we'd be okay. And then you started talking about how the problem would have been solved if it would have been on the top of the agenda. And now we're confronted with this timely problem. But you also said that we could solve the problem. It's not a technical problem. We just don't have the resources. Well, instead of trusting, you know, the private sector to do it when they failed already, maybe we should just make this a public sector problem and consider this, you know, for instance, if there was a war or something we thought was national security, we would use the public sector to solve the problem. And if it's going to be as costly and dangerous later on, maybe we should think of just putting our resources to solve the problem that we know how to solve.
Ed Marr.
Well, you know, I guess part of me agrees with you, but that would assume that the public sector was in good enough shape to be an example to the private sector and maybe to you know, assist in some ways. And just the opposite is true. Outside the Social Security Administration and a few others, the federal government is in desperate shape. Many agencies simply will not be fixed in time. And then you get the state and local governments. There's some 85,000 public entities in the United States alone. Many of them don't have the resources to deal with this problem effectively. So the idea that the public sector is somehow going to come to the aid of the private sector and sort of organize and lead a Normandy invasion, if you will, just is not in the cards. There isn't enough time for that.
Tony Keys and Ed Marr will be with us for another 20 minutes. Easton, Maryland, good morning.
Good morning, Brian. This is Larry Davis. I got a couple questions for somebody like me who's not computer literate. First of all, how can I test to see if my computer will take the year 2000? And if it doesn't, what can I do about it?
Thanks. Tony Keys.
Fortunately, today now there are sites on the internet that you can go to and download free software that will help you test whether or not your computer has a problem. There isn't a single solution and test for every personal computer, sort of a generic test, but there are those out there that are available, and as you look at them, you'll understand whether or not it's right for your computer. Probably the best site to start with would be one, year2000.com. On that site, you'll either find some of that free software or you'll be directed through links to other sites that offer it.
Winona, Maryland, good morning.
Winona, Maryland?
Yes, sir, you're on the air.
All right, thanks. Listen, I've got a bunch of questions. I've had 30 years in the business, and this year 2000 occurs to me there's going to be a lot of stuff that people don't know where it's hidden. And I think those things are more likely going to be the things that will pop up after the fact, wouldn't you think?
Hold on just a second, Ed Marr.
We've done a terrible job of documenting our software over the last 30 years. There's a great cartoon that is circulated, and it shows a graveyard scene, and a gentleman approaches the widow and says, "I'm sorry to trouble you at this time, but did Bill ever mention anything about documentation or source code?" You know, it's documentation, the writing down of how we prepared these very complex systems costs a lot of money to do it well, and in the competitive environment a lot of this software got produced. It didn't get accomplished, or it got done badly. So going back and trying to figure out what we have often takes a lot of the time. And by the way, Brian, I saw an email we received telling me that I had the representation of the A on that first graphic I showed you wrong. The gentleman, I assume, is right, but it does go to the point to prove how difficult the problem is. Apparently I have a 1 transposed with a 0 in the A representation, and it goes to the point that just putting this in, you know, it's very easy to transpose these things and make mistakes. And the truth of the matter is that mistake would bring a system, a program, to a halt. It wouldn't know how to deal with that, so it would either bring it to a halt or it would represent a different character than the one I really wanted. So you can see how critical a simple mistake like that is.
Back to Winona, Maryland. You had another question?
Yeah, I have a bunch of them, really. One thing is, I remember a PC has an internal clock. Are those clocks reliable in this aspect? Are they all going to have to be changed too?
Tony Keys?
Well, again, earlier there was a caller who asked a question about the safety of buying PCs today. And really, up until very recently, the majority of PCs that were being shipped still had this problem in the BIOS. That's what you're talking about, the central computer clock. That's what provides the clock for all of the programs, the operating system, and your data in a computer.
Is that on my little this little board here? Is that this thing right over here where it says BIOS 386?
That's exactly what it is, right here.
Right there?
Now, in some cases, you can amend that with software, but in other cases, you'll have to actually physically replace that chip.
How much will that cost?
I'm going to have to defer to Ed on that one.
It's not the cost of the chip so much. Those chips are really quite inexpensive. It's, are there enough of them? Are the ones that you go to replace it with, have they been checked? And then just simply finding these machines. The last estimate I saw said there are some 300 billion of these chips that are buried underground or in hardened cases. You know, finding and getting to them, deciding if this chip works or not, and replacing it. That's the problem.
Tony Key said 300 million, not
Yeah.
300 billion. And why not? I'm going to have to move on because we've got a lot of people wanting to ask these two gentlemen questions. Dallas, Texas, you're next.
Well, I'm kind of a skeptic here in this matter. I think someone figured out that this might be a problem. So people start, business thinkers, say, okay, we might be able to make a bunch of money on this. So let's tell the people, and, you know, 1999, we sell a bunch of new software, a bunch of new hardware, and we've just cleaned up.
Tony Keys.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. It's an important one to deal with because it allows us to talk about a couple of things. One is, there's no conspiracy here. This is just plain old human nature at work. We've all done this. We do it with our home budget. You want to avoid and try not to deal with unpleasant and costly problems, hoping they'll go away. Maybe events will contrive themselves so you don't have to deal with it.
Let me add this to, because it's a fact and it gets down to the basics here. Thank you for talking about this. Please tell me what this means to the average American. I think you're giving a mixed message today. On the one hand, you say people should not panic yet. On the other, you say this problem will not be fixed. I am starting to hear all kinds of stories about having cash on hand for gas and groceries and stockpiling food. What is the average person to do? It seems to me if I take a wait and see attitude, the time I see, it will be, by the time I see, it will be too late to do anything of substance. Please address this from Beth Kaufman. And this is P.S. What is the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario probably would be triggered outside the U.S. You know, today we have a global economy, a global information system. It's much like our ecology, which is indivisible. So is our economy today. We felt that in October when we had the problems with Asia that overnight affected our markets. In that scenario, and with this problem, you can have systems that in fact have been repaired, infecting systems, or infected by systems that have not been. And so here in the U.S., if we manage somehow to fix most of our mission-critical systems, by interacting with the rest of the world, we could still have problems and, in fact, perhaps destroy all the good work we've done on some systems.
Edmar, what should someone do that owns a computer, knows nothing about any of this stuff? What should they do?
Well, again, it depends on how important that personal computer is to your life, your well-being. I think if you do some of the things that most of us do, write a letter and maybe do a spreadsheet or do your checkbook or perhaps go up on the internet and pursue a hobby or what have you, well then I think you want to perhaps look up on the internet, find the fixes or the patches for your particular equipment. Perhaps take it back to the place you bought it. You can go up on the web and go to the sites for the various programs, and they will tell you how to fix or update. Again, those things I see as annoyance factors. That's not where the real problem's going to hit. The real problem's going to hit in public safety kinds of issues and in the way the government operates and the like.
Let me take a call from Los Angeles. We'll continue talking about this. Go ahead, Los Angeles. You're on the air.
Is this me? Am I on the air?
You are.
Okay. I have two questions. First of all, thank you very much for bringing this subject to our attention. I really appreciate that. But I have two questions. What about the communication chips in satellites? And what about that are permanent chips and the ones that have to be changed manually? And the second question, I'll ask them both, and you can answer while I get off the phone. And don't power companies need to be fixed, one of the first ones that need to be fixed, because without the power, nothing's going to work.
Thanks. Tony Keys.
You know, I feel obligated to go back to that previous caller for just a moment, because her concern was really, what do I do with my household, my finances? How do I prepare in that way, and should I? Yes, you should. If we begin to prepare over the next 16 months, and we don't wait until the last few weeks before January 1st, 2000, then we won't have panic, and we'll be able to manage this thing. We'll have enough resource to do that. This is just like an insurance policy. It makes good sense. People who live in California store water and food in case there is an earthquake. In Maine, I'm certain they would have wished that they had stored food and water when they had the ice storm. So it's just prudent to take some of these steps. Another thing you should do is get hard copies of all information records that are stored electronically on you. You want to get your Social Security benefit statement. Any financial planner will tell you to do that anyway. It's good to have on hand. If you have a passport, get it updated. If you don't, get one. Sit down at your kitchen table sometime and just make a list of all the things that you can think of that are stored electronically on you, your family, or people you care about, and then go out and make certain that you have hard copies of all of that. You'll be arming yourself and preparing for what might happen.
Jacksonville, Arkansas?
Yes, sir.
You're on the air.
Well, can we assume that when the lights are still on and year 2000, there won't be a meltdown?
Edmar, go ahead. Go ahead, caller.
Well, because like the previous caller said before, she kind of stole some of my thunder. If you don't have the electrical power of the grids, you know, what's going to happen even if we are ready?
Edmar.
That's clearly key to all of this, and I wish there was more public information as to how the utilities, not only here in the U.S. but worldwide, are doing. What little bit we do know about them suggests some real problems. Many of these chips that are involved in the distribution and the metering, the regulation of the electricity that flows, when tested, have failed in actually a greater proportion than the average. And we're so interconnected in terms of our electrical generating capacity. We have these grids in the United States where power is shared and shifted, and there's something called the SCADA, S-C-A-D-A, which is how this shifting of electricity gets controlled. And to date, we've not had a full-scale test of any of these systems. So I think there is reason for some concern. And as we've continued to point out, people won't panic for 16 months. If you come clean, You tell folks where we're at, what the problems are, and what's going on. If we knew more about the electrical grid, we would have fewer of these kinds of concerns. And it's just this lack of information, and what information is put out is almost Pollyanna-ish, and that's what concerns us.
Congressman Steve Horn next in a few minutes. Fairfax County, Virginia. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Brian, I can't believe I got through. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for your program, and thank you for C-SPAN.
Thanks.
I've been in government contracting for information systems for about 20 years, and your panelists are really interesting. And I'd appreciate some comments from them on public policy issue is that during this administration, particularly in the first 4 or 5 years, excuse me, the Vice President undertook a tremendous public policy focus and expenditure of funds on reinventing government and the information superhighway. Yet I never heard a word from him about the year 2000 problem, and an awful lot could have been accomplished in the last 6 years if he had perhaps even been aware of the problem.
Thanks for the call. And I mentioned this earlier because it seems to be a political issue. Here in the National Journal, which is not on one side or the other, they have winners and losers, and they say a loser is Vice President Gore, who fretted about global warming, legal authorities, and campaign finance laws while missing the biggest technology problem facing the country. Is this accurate?
Well, it is. I don't think Al Gore is any more at fault than any other captain of industry, for instance. I think he got bad advice, as did many CEOs in this country. If they had any awareness of the problem at all, it may not have filtered up to their level until very recently.
Could this be a big political issue in the year 2000?
It's going to be a huge political issue. We're actually going to begin experiencing problems in January of this coming year, in 1999, because some software looks out a year in advance. So we're going to have, 23 months of problems before the November election in 2000. And because Al Gore has the reputation of being a technologist, he's going to bear a significant responsibility here. People will blame him.
Millbrae, California. Go ahead, please.
Brian, this is I'm a software developer and have been in this business since the 60s. And one thing that seems to be missing a lot from the discussion, and I've been following this issue for many years, advising my friends to take precautions and so forth. One thing that seems to be missing are live actual experiences of failures. In 1973, our company was involved in a situation where we brought down 25% of the IBM mainframe computers. And I'm very, very concerned about this situation, and I think we need more concrete examples of failure systems.
Why did the computer system you're talking about come down?
I'm a little bit nervous, so just give me a second here. One of our programmers wrote some software that dynamically changed the way it operated on midnight, January 19th, 1973. And Ed there would know what would happen. Instead of using the B transient area, he used the, it ended up loading this transient in the 0 position of memory, wiping out the PSWs. And for the first time in the history of publishing of the newspaper in some Swiss country, they were not able to deliver their newspapers because they printed their labels every day. And even that newspaper had a backup system in a remote location, and they failed because they were using our software as well.
Thanks. Ed Marr, you want to add to this?
Well, yeah, you know, been there, done that. It doesn't take much, Brian, to bring a machine to its knees. Machines are designed to fail safe. When it doesn't know where to put something, doesn't know where to get a piece of information, or when there's an illegal operation, when you try to divide by 0, for example, the machine is designed, most all machines are designed to stop, fail, alerts a human being that there's a problem. Well, when it happens singularly, there's no big deal because there's someone who can go fix it. Our problem here is this is going to happen in parallel. It's going to happen hundreds of thousands of times in hundreds of thousands of different places, and therein lies the nature of this problem. Each individual problem is fixable. It's the scale and the scope and the dimension of it.
Just a couple minutes left with our guest, but we're going to continue talking about Y2K for the rest of the morning. Broomall, Pennsylvania, good morning.
Good morning. My question is this. everything, every one of my financial records are owned by a company, not owned, but they're held by a company electronically, like Charles Schwab, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are you saying that it would make sense to protect myself to get all the certificates in my own safety deposit box rather than let all this stuff sit out there?
Tony Keys.
If you're going to stay in the equities marketplace, that would be prudent. If you want to hold on to, say, your blue chips through the window, then it would make good sense to have those stock certificates in your possession in your safe deposit box. It doesn't just stop there. If you stop and think how much information and how much of what you own or theoretically own is recorded by computer, it's really frightening. And so just as a prudent precaution, if you can do it, if those stocks aren't margined, then you can actually take possession of them for, say, the 90-day period going through the window, and it might make good sense to do that.
Albany, Oregon, you're next.
Yes, I'm nervous. I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
I have, first of all, I want to thank the gentleman because it has never occurred to me to get hard copies of everything. And so I appreciate that. The practical advice, that for us ordinary citizens, the practical advice of how we can protect ourselves without panicking, and we've got 16 months to do it. The other question that I have is, how is the Defense Department doing? Because we survive on Social Security and military retirement and barely get by.
Thanks. Ed Marr?
Well, there was a group called the Cassandra Project, and these folks, a wonderful lady by the name of Paloma O'Reilly and a gentleman by the name of Jim Lord, who are maintaining a website, and they're actually going out and helping communities and individual people think about contingency planning in their community, in their church group, and on their cul-de-sac. And I would invite the caller to try to contact the folks there. You know, in terms of the Defense Department, peace may break out here, only because we may not be able to wage the high-tech war kind of thing that we could do now.
Ed Marr, Stephen Horn's grade on the Defense Department here, and I've got it on the table, is a D, and OMB gave it a 29, which is very low on their list there. Is that accurate, you think?
Oh, I think, again, you have to understand something about all of those grades. Those are self-assessments, and those are not, and by and large, that's not been audited. So you have the Defense Department essentially giving itself a D.
Meaning they won't be ready by the year 2000?
No, I think on current estimates, they'll have their systems in 2012 or something to that effect.
Knoxville, Tennessee. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Hi.
First, I'd like to commend you on your guest, and if you would admonish your other guests to be more succinct in how they answer the questions, that would be helpful. I've got two quick questions. One, my vehicle. It has a computer in it. In the year 2000, am I going to be able to turn the key and my car will start? And number two, I've got a PC. If I don't do anything on the year 2000, am I going to lose all the information in my computer, and is it going to shut down if I don't do anything? I'll await your answer.
Tony Keys.
In the first question, as far as U.S. manufacturers of automobiles, the best information we have today is there's likely not to be a problem. Last year we had a representative from General Motors on our radio program, and he assured us at that time that they were 98% certain that they wouldn't have a problem. That's not to say that all manufacturers won't, and it makes good sense to go back to the manufacturer of your automobile, the dealership where you bought it, and ask those questions directly. I've done that. You should do that. It just makes good sense. The second issue, there's no real simple answer to that, I'm sorry. But if you use your computer for word processing and other simple applications, you're not going to really have a problem here. You're going to have a date that doesn't make any sense. You may be able to just live with that. You can manually change it in the computer, you know, each time you use the computer. The loss of data certainly is a potential, but for home use, it's really not such a big deal.
Steve Horn of the Congress coming up next, and then John Koskinen who will be here from the President's Council. Let's go to San Bernardino, California. Last call. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Ed, Tony, Brian. Let's see, I wanted to, first of all, I want to say, Ed, you had that A code right. That's Charlie 1 EPSIDIC, and that's for mainframes, not ASCII for the PCs.
What about this audience, huh?
That's a great illustration of the problem.
Okay, what I wanted to say is I've been a mainframe programmer since 1977, and I've been seeing this oncoming train wreck here. I've had folks I was working with at that time that said, hey, look, this problem, I'm not worried about it because I'm going to be retired by the time this comes around. And, Tony, you're absolutely correct. We've had a sort of quarterly mentality with management. And, you know, if it isn't going to happen in the next quarter, we're not going to work on it. But this is what I want to say. I've had to be really involved with this because I worked in managing storage for mainframes, and we were hit with this early in the late 80s with this problem. IBM got their act together, and they finally gave us a way to represent dates past the year 2000. And you know, we're dealing with storing data, you know, into the 21st century, so we had to deal with this. I want to say what I want to say is, hopefully this will help out here a little bit. There's a couple of problems here. One is we don't have enough resources within a limited time. The way my company works, and I think a lot of others, you can only work for one company. So you can have limited resources, and there's just not enough time. If we weren't locked into contracts, I could be working, you know, on the weekends trying to solve this problem. The other problem that we have here is that in fixing this problem is that we've lost a lot of companies with bad documentation, as you said, Tony. They've lost the source, and the only way to get it back is to reverse engineer it. Now, I am a assembler programmer. I know I know how to do this. I can look at these codes like the A1 and reverse them. And right now, there's very few assembler programmers because everyone went to C, and this is the newfangled language. And so you just don't have those resources. So there's very few of us left around that can do this kind of thing.
Thanks, caller. Edmar and Tony Keyes, last comment from both of you.
Well, I think the caller illustrates something that we see all the time. The technical folks out there get this problem and have gotten it for a while. It's now beginning to be absorbed and accepted by the management folks who now have to allocate the time, the money, and the resources to fix it. But we've simply waited too long for that to happen, and now we really need to focus on contingency planning, planning for system failures. And I think if we do that responsibly, we can mitigate the most terrible, the worst consequences of this problem. If we go along in again this manner of everything's okay, well then I have some serious concerns.
Tony Keyes.
Don't ignore this problem. It is real and serious. Ed talked about contingency planning for businesses and government. Individuals should do that as well. This is unpleasant, it's scary, but don't ignore it, don't write it off. Read everything you can get on it, educate yourself, and begin taking steps today. If you do that, it's not painful. You can get a lot done in 16 months. And I would advise everyone to do that.
Tony Keyes is the author of the year 2000 Computer Crisis in the bookstores.
Yes, it is.
He's a Dayton, Ohio native. He's an Ohio University graduate in 1974 in finance administration. Along with Ed Marr, they have a company called Y2K Enterprises, Inc., and Mr. Marr is from Brooklyn originally, University of Dayton graduate. Mr. Marr, who can hire you, and what would they hire you for?
Well, you know, in the past, there's been this thought about there would be the army of COBOL programmers. But as your last caller indicated, what it's turned out is a lot of that basic stuff can be automated in tools. What's really needed is old guys like us who understand both the business process, computer languages, design, and operating system. And there's just few of us left willing to work the 12 and 16 hours around the clock. Most of us have moved on to other things, and so that's where the greatest need is. And essentially, you know, anyone with those skills can go into project managing these kinds of projects to manage the complexity.
One last question, and we've got to go. Tony Keyes, where can they get a hold of you, in what town?
Here in Maryland, they can reach us at 301-924-6643. Just to add to what Ed was saying, he's speaking for himself there, by the way. What we do is try to help people understand this problem. So we speak on the subject, we write on the subject. That's really what we're trying to do.
Ed Marr and Tony Keys both have a show together here on WWRC. Thanks for joining. But here's the president from July 14th when he spoke to the National Academy of Sciences on this Y2K problem.
I came here today because I wanted to stress the urgency of the challenge to people who are not in this room. So often one of the wry and amusing aspects of the nature of my work is that when I give a speech like this, I'm typically preaching to the choir, as we say back home. But hopefully the sermon is heard beyond the four walls of this room. Because clearly we must set forth what the government is doing, what business is doing, but also what all of us have yet to do to meet this challenge together. And there is still a pressing need for action. The consequences of the millennium bug, if not addressed, could simply be a rash of annoyances like being unable to use a credit card at the supermarket or the video store losing track of the tape you have already returned. Does that ever happen to you? It really is aggravating. It could affect electric power. I just wanted to remind you that I used to have a life, and I know about things like that. It could affect electric power, phone service, air travel, major governmental service. As the Vice President said, we're not just talking about computer networks, but billions of embedded chips built into everyday products. And it's worth remembering that the typical family home today has more computer power in it than the entire MIT campus had 20 years ago. An oil drilling rig alone may include 10,000 separate chips. The solution, unfortunately, is massive, painstaking, and labor-intensive. It will take a lot of time to rewrite lines of computer code in existing systems, to buy new ones, or put in place backup plans so that essential business and government services are not interrupted. With millions of hours needed to rewrite billions of lines of code in hundreds of thousands of interdependent organizations, this is clearly one of the most complex management challenges in history. Now, this is not one of the summer movies where you can close your eyes during the scary part.
John Koskinen, how big is this problem from the White House standpoint?
Well, it's clearly a global problem. I think it's going to potentially affect virtually everyone in the world in one way or another. So I think it's worth everybody's attention at this time.
And what are you doing about it? How's the council work?
Well, the council is a collection of 35 federal agencies, including the federal regulators. So we have the Federal Reserve, the SEC, the FTC, and others, which is unique to some extent. Well, we did that because we need one place to coordinate the government's efforts, not only with regard to their own systems, but also with regard to our outreach to the rest of the world in terms of trying to raise the level of awareness and the level of activity. So we basically, with the federal agencies, have looked at all the range of activities around the world that might be affected by this problem, and now have 35 sectors which are divided primarily along lines of the economy, the transportation sector, electric power, oil and gas, financial institutions. And each of those sectors has a working group of relevant federal agencies with experience or background or responsibilities in those areas, chaired by one of the members of the council. And their task is to coordinate the federal outreach to organizations operating in each of those sectors. What we asked each agency head when I met with them all individually was for them to think about their area of public policy interest and whose failure to deal with this problem would create a major problem for either the American economy or the American public, and then design a program to reach out to those organizations, even though we don't have authority over them, we don't have responsibility for them, but reach out to them to encourage them to make sure that they're working on this problem, and then over time, if we can engage in a constructive working relationship, to be able to collect from them assessments as to how their particular part of the economy is functioning.
How long have you worked for the president?
Well, this time around, I've been here 6 months.
And your previous job was deputy?
Previously, I was Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget for 3 years.
We're going to take a call from Sweetwater, Texas. Go ahead, please.
Yes. First, I'd like to give a website. It's very, very quick and very easy that might give some illumination into this. And if I could, it's Harvest, Harvest, dash trust, TRUST.org. And let me just say this, common sense, you had a caller in the last segment who said he thought this was being overblown. And I agree with him because common sense tells me that huge bureaucracies who have extreme control over people are not going to let go of that control. Now, I have a theory, and it's just my theory. And let me say this first, that if enough people perceive something to be a problem, even if it isn't a problem, it will affect us. So I'm not trying to make light of it. I do think that we should be, as people out here in the country, we need to be prepared. However, my theory is, and this is simply my theory, that this would be a very good way to create, for the people to create their own financial collapse, which is what the government wants, but they want the people, it would be wonderful to see if the people created it by themselves, by panicking. And
why does the government want that?
Because in order to completely, I'm nervous, as you can tell, and in order to completely eliminate the middle class, in order to bring us into world socialist government. Now, a lot of people are going to laugh at this and say this, dismiss this, but I just want them to remember this, because one of these days, not too far off in the future, this is going to make sense to people.
And you think that the government here in town wants to create a worldwide socialism?
Exactly. And all the governments are have for decades been working for this. And this would be a perfect vehicle.
All right, I'll let you go. Thanks for the point. John Koskinen?
Good. Well, I think the point that's important to make is, at least from my standpoint, working directly with the President, our part of the government has no intention of trying to increase the difficulty or the problem that results from this situation. I think that, as I've said on numerous occasions, the problem in some cases may be overblown. The real problem is no one knows at this point in time. There's great potential for harm. I think the caller makes a good point that I've been concerned about, and I know Steve Horn, who was here before, is, and that is that it is correct that if everyone overreacts in anticipation to what they think the problem will be, that by itself contains the possibility of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we could have significant economic disruptions if everyone decides to do something different for the first time. If, for instance, 200 million Americans all decide to take some of their money out of the bank or decide to go fill up their gas tanks the last week in December next year, that's not normal behavior. The system is not geared up to deal with it, and as I say, it will create its own economic dislocation. But there's no one I know in the government who thinks that would be a good thing.
Our guest was born in Cleveland, Ohio, grew up in Ashland, Kentucky, went and graduated from Yale Law School, did his undergraduate work at Duke University. Years ago, worked as an administrative assistant for Senator Abraham Ribicoff, was law clerk to Judge David Bazelon, Chief Judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals here in Washington. We go to Austin, Texas next. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. I'm a first-time caller. Like the lady that just called from Texas, perhaps we Texans are a little more independent thinking than the rest of the nation. Along those same lines, I'm concerned that this might be an opportunity for martial law to be declared if there is a big enough catastrophe, if financial centers collapse and the trucking industry is down and food riots, and I mean, if this is a really big thing, has there been any talk of martial law being declared?
John Koskinen.
No. Our hope is, of course, and our plans are that we'll never get that far. And I think the basic infrastructure of the country will survive without major disruptions, although there's no guarantee about that. As I said earlier, there's no one who thinks that would be a good outcome. I don't know of anyone who thinks that having to resort to martial law would be, in fact, a goal that we ought to strive for. And as I say, at this juncture, our major focus is to try to ensure that the critical aspects of the infrastructure of the country are dealing with the problem effectively. That includes electric power, the oil and gas industry, transportation, the financial institutions. And our experience thus far is that the large organizations in those industries are well organized to deal with this problem, are devoting significant resources to it, have a large number of people working on it, and therefore I think have a significant chance and possibility of making it through without major disruptions. We're much more concerned about small to medium-sized organizations, many of whom think this problem doesn't apply to them.
What's your budget a year and how many people work for you?
Well, how many people work for me is a hard question to answer, because basically what I've done is organize the President's Council and these working groups to be run by the agencies. So when you count all the people who actually directly respond to my requests, I have probably 300 or 400 senior government managers. My immediate staff is at this point about half a dozen. I have another support staff of about half a dozen at GSA and another half a dozen at OMB. So I probably have 20 people directly working with me to coordinate the work of those 300 people across the government.
And where's your office?
My office is in the old executive office building next to the White House.
Altus, Oklahoma. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I've enjoyed your program this morning tremendously. It is so helpful to all of us. And I, too, am from a rural city. And I believe that whether we're rural or in a megalopolis, that our Social Security checks, even if they arrive, or if the water will be pumped, it all depends on electricity. I'd like to know what's being done to make sure that all 50 states, that the many hundreds of power companies are making plans to continue their delivery system. I know that we get our electricity from Oklahoma City, and there's 5 different stations, 5 different terminals for it to travel 150 miles. Every one of them have embedded chips, and the PCs won't PC, and nothing's going to work unless we have the power and the electricity. What is being done? I hope we put this on top of the pyramid.
John Koskinen.
Clearly isn't on top of the pyramid, because you're exactly right. If you don't have power, it doesn't matter whether your systems otherwise work or not. In our working group, reaching out to the industry, our electric power operation is chaired for the federal government by the Department of Energy, but supported by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the Rural Utility Service of the Agriculture Department. And we're fortunate that the North American Reliability Council, which is a collection of all of the major private power companies, has agreed to serve as an umbrella organization for us, both to coordinate the response of private power companies to this issue, and also to work with us to make sure that we can continue to monitor and assess the state of readiness of the power industry. A related organization, the Electric Power Research Institute, has been doing substantial research and sharing that information with its members about the embedded chip problem. So I think at this juncture we are making great progress. As may have been mentioned earlier, we are pushing very hard in the Congress for legislation, basically Good Samaritan legislation, that would say that companies that voluntarily share their experience in how to deal with this problem should not be held to any increased liability as a result of that voluntary sharing of information. And what we have in mind is that as large companies and medium-sized companies develop solutions to this problem, they should not only be providing that technical information to others at their level of operation, but we're really concerned about reaching out into the rural areas, into the smaller power companies, smaller utilities, to ensure that they have access to the best technical data possibly generated by the industry.
Los Angeles for John Koskinen. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Isn't it true that the IRS won't be able to catch anybody that owes them money?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who owe the IRS money who hopes that's true, but I think at this stage the IRS is on its plan to be ready to both collect taxes and provide refunds by the end of next year. But I would have to tell you that they have some of the largest, most complicated, in some ways antiquated systems in the world, so it's a major challenge. But the new commissioner, Charles Rosati, is an experienced manager in the information technology area. He has a very good plan that he's implementing. The Secretary of the Treasury, Bob Rubin, is monitoring the situation closely, as he has been for several months. So I think my advice to anybody who owes taxes is you should not assume that the IRS won't be able to find you.
For 20 years you worked for the Palmieri Company?
Yes.
That's not Victor Palmieri, is it?
That is Victor Palmieri.
And he was very much involved. I mean, years ago, did a public television show, as I remember.
The public television show, The Advocates. Very good.
Where is he now?
Victor and the company are still alive and well. Victor lives and works in New York. Our my job for 20 years with Victor as my partner was to do large-scale financial turnarounds of everything from the Penn Central to Mutual Benefit, which was the largest failed life insurance company in history.
Did he ever run for office?
Victor never ran for office.
Hilton Head, South Carolina, for John Koskinen. Go ahead, please.
Morning. After watching the your first three guests, and then listening to your guest right now, I was kind of concerned to hear him say in his initial comments that in many cases this problem is completely overblown, downplaying how important it is. I spent 30 years in software development, technical sales, etc., and from my background knowledge, it is not overblown. And listening to his background, I'd like to know what is his technical expertise? Has he managed technical development forces? Has he been in the software development business? I mean, how close to this problem is he to oversee this and report to the president?
That's a good question. First, let me clear up the overblown point. My point about overblown is I think it's overblown only to the extent that people assume that it's a certainty there are going to be major disruptions. On the other hand, as I said in my opening statement, all of us are very concerned about the possibility of major disruptions. And the distinction is only that I think we're going to be able to solve a lot of these, but it's not guaranteed. But on the other hand, I don't think you can guarantee that we'll never get most of them solved, which is what some people are saying. So to that extent, I think if you're guaranteeing failure, that's overblown. But nobody's overblowing the seriousness of the problem, which I've been stating myself. With regard to my background, while I was here as Deputy Director for Management, I oversaw all management for the federal government, including information technology. Spent a significant amount of time revamping the way the federal government deals with information technology. We totally changed the statutory framework. We created chief information officers in every federal agency. We created a Chief Information Officers Council that I chaired, and we gave them as their first responsibility dealing with this problem. While I was a physics major as an undergraduate, I have not been an information technology programmer through my life. But basically, while this has significant technical challenges, particularly in embedded chips, the problem nationally is not to have a techie at the top of this job. The problem is this is a very substantial, perhaps the largest management challenge that the country and perhaps the world has ever met. And so the reason I was actually asked by the President and the Vice President to return was because I've spent, as you just heard, most of my career managing crises, turnarounds, and large management challenges. This is a huge project management challenge.
Check a couple of figures with you. I read somewhere that there are 250 million PCs in the world. Is that accurate from what you know?
That's probably, I'm not sure anybody's ever made a total count, but there's certainly a lot of them out there.
$600 billion they keep quoting as the price of correcting all this.
The $600 billion is actually the high end of an estimate range that has always been used of $300 to $600 billion. And that was the best estimate or guess people made when they started. It may turn out when we get done with it all that it's high primarily because the assumption was that every line of code would be rewritten. And instead what's happened in a lot of cases is tools have been developed that allow you to either go through the lines of code without having to look at them each individually and finding where the problems are, or techniques such as windowing, as it's called, which are in effect rolling the clock back, have been developed that allow you in some cases not to have to redo the code.
John Koskinen with us for another 25 minutes. Mesilla Park, New Mexico, you're next.
Good morning, Brian. This is Jim Dyke.
Welcome.
I'm about 30 miles from White Sands Proving Ground. I'm reading the Las Cruces, New Mexico Sun News, dated Wednesday, July 3, which reports that 5 tests to determine what effects computer programs at White Sands could have on remote-controlled aircraft, radar, and telemetry when computer clocks roll over the year 2000 all passed flawlessly Thursday. That would have been a month ago, July 2. Because of the tests that are taken very seriously, the most crucial of all, successfully allowed the jet's onboard computer, and that was an Air Force F-4 Phantom jet, allowed the jet's onboard air computer to continue working smoothly after the computer clocks zeroed out at the start of the year 2000. Further, had the computer failed, the jet's navigation system would have stopped, and a pilot aboard the plane would have had to manually fly the plane. A hush fell over the control center as the final seconds to the year 2000 were counted down. 10 seconds after the fateful moment, the jet continued to fly unencumbered, and radar and telemetry kept working. A real accomplishment for the White Sands Proving Ground. Within an hour of the test completion, the gentleman in charge was besieged with interview requests from the British Broadcasting System and ABC's Good Morning America. Why can't we get this information spread across the country that our military tax-supported proving ground has solved the problem? Thank you.
Well, you're right. It is. We were all delighted with that result. It didn't happen overnight. That was the result of months of work on all of those interrelated systems. The Defense Department has some of the greatest challenges in the world because, as you just described, its smart weaponry is smart because it has embedded circuits, integrated circuits throughout the weapon systems and its support systems. So the Defense Department is working across the board to solve these problems. And I think you're right. My view is that we have an obligation over time to be candid with the public and report not only what works, but what we're still struggling to deal with, because I think the way to deal with the potential of overreaction that we talked about earlier is for the public to have hard information. So I think you're right. Sometimes good news is not news that anybody wants to report, but there's been enough discussion about the problems here that I think in a lot of cases this is going to be an exception to that rule, and I think as we get good news, there will be more reporting of it. That story actually was fairly widely reported across the country. But it is a single incident of a single weapon system that is compliant. The department has a lot of others it's working on, and I think over the next 6 to 12 months we will be working with the department and others to advise the public candidly about where we are in our progress. As you know, and you've heard earlier, the federal government is actually the only organization in the world that is providing regular quarterly updates, agency by agency, on every mission-critical system it has, where it is, and what remains to be done.
John Koskinen is the President's chair of the Council on Year 2000 Conversion. We go to Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He grew up in Ashland, Kentucky. Is that anywhere near Hopkinsville?
Well, it's the other end of the state. We used to play basketball against Hopkinsville, so I know where it is.
Go ahead, Hopkinsville.
Okay, I want to thank C-SPAN and Mr. Koskinen for his time. My question is the government works on a fiscal year ending September 30th. Is this going to take effect September 30th with the government, or is it December 31st?
Very good question. A lot of people have assumed that this problem is going to only occur on midnight, December 31st, 1999. And the point you raise is exactly right. Any company, and the government is included, that has a fiscal year that begins somewhere before December 31 or January 1st, 2000, will have to start dealing with financial systems that recognize the year 2000. So some organizations have fiscal years that start in April, May, or June of next year, and their financial systems will actually have to cross that border then. Similarly, what we call forward-looking systems will have to deal with this problem earlier than the end of next year. If you want to make an airline reservation, a hotel reservation sometime in the middle of next year, planning a vacation or a trip into the early part of the year 2000, those systems will be challenged at that time. Just as credit card companies have discovered, of course, that when they have an expiration date before 2000, that means their systems have to deal with that now. So I think you're right. There will be a series of challenges as we move through 1999 as fiscal years, companies' operations, forward-looking systems all have to begin to deal with the problem.
Aurora, Colorado. Go ahead, please. Aurora, Colorado, you're on the air. Please speak up. Aurora, are you there? Aurora doesn't seem to be there. We will go next to Smyrna, Georgia.
Hello.
You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just listening to the caller that was talking about the technical expertise of the, Air Force and all in our country, which I'm confident of our country's abilities. But I was watching a program last night on the Learning Channel or History Something that was showing several years ago a near miss of the defense boards where it was showing the whole world, and it was showing some glitch made the whole thing light up showing the U.S. being targeted from Russia. And I'm wondering if this computer problem in the other parts of the world could trigger any of those missiles.
John Koskinen?
Well, that's another important question. I've talked at some length with both the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary about this issue, and they've been concerned about. There's been some publicity about the fact that the Secretary of Defense has already talked with the Russians about exchanging information to ensure that their early warning system and ours don't send the wrong information or misinformation. We think, as you note, that our system will be in pretty good shape, but not only the Russians, but all sorts of other countries have very complicated systems, depending on satellites and transmissions, that we need to make sure don't mistakenly assume that there is a problem, or even worse, go down and therefore render them in effect blind, at which point you have to worry about how they will overreact. So we are, as part of our work with the Defense Department, their outreach responsibilities include reaching out to all of our allies and other contacts in the world to try to at least begin a dialogue to ensure that as we get closer to the end of next year, there aren't any misunderstandings.
We will be joining in progress an all-day hearing on the part of the National Bipartisan Commission on the Future of Medicare. In the chair is Senator John Breaux and Representative Bill Thomas, and that will start at about 17 minutes from now. Ocala, Florida, you're next for John Koskinen. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Koskinen.
Good morning.
Mr. Koskinen, let me say first, I am completely computer illiterate. So if you will bear with me to ask you a couple of questions, I would appreciate it.
Those are always the best questions, the people who ask the basic fundamental ones.
Right. And Brian, could I ask just a short follow-up question?
Sure.
Or make a little statement. I have a problem putting it all together, what I want to say. I can think it all out when I start to talk to you, I have a problem. Okay, we have known ever since we've been making computers that the year 2000 was coming. And I heard you and another speaker say that we have just spent on IRS and Medicare, et cetera, billions of dollars to bring these computer systems update. Is there some reason why they can't make a computer, couldn't make a computer that would roll over 2000, go right on? And if not, why? But I don't understand all that.
But hold on just a second, because I got a fax on something that came up earlier, and you can either verify this or add to it. And this is from a fellow by the name of Kenneth Parody of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The Mac is not subject to the 2000 problem. They use a different system and are good until the year 2043. Is that your experience?
That is our understanding, that the Mac computers actually were programmed to roll over past the year 2000. And back to the caller's question, clearly it is a straightforward problem, which is that you can solve this problem if you deal with the year and identify the year with 4 digits. 1999 is the way you identify next year rather than just 99, so that the year 2000 is 2 and 3 zeros rather than just 2 zeros. So that increasingly in the last year or two, all software and hardware produced has, to all intents and purposes, been what we call year 2000 compliant. That is, it will roll over automatically. The problem is, and the difficulty is, all of the programs and the hardware produced in the 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s that designated the year with 2 digits. And that's where you have to make the repairs, either go through and rewrite the code so that the 2-digit representations become 4 digits, or in effect roll the clock back and say that when you get to the year 2000, it's actually, in some cases, 1991. In some cases, it's 28 years earlier, because that's when the calendar repeats itself. So in some cases, they'll be rolling clocks back to 1972 to allow them to fix the problem.
Your follow-up comment, sir?
Yes, the question is, could the computers have been made to roll over automatically? Not, you tell me a lot of information, but I don't understand all of it. Could they have been made? And the next comment they're going to make, could anybody see asking Bill Gates how to work on this problem? Because I hear a lot of criticism of him, but I never hear about all the intelligence he has, not to the extent he could help the government.
Thanks.
Good question. Clearly, we could have made, and did made, as you heard the comment about the Mac, we could have made hardware and software over the last 10 years that was compliant, and some companies did, although they were in the minority. With regard to help we can get from the technical industry, Microsoft and Bill Gates and others, the first thing that we're delighted to watch them all do is try to make sure that they produce compliant products, and more importantly, provide public information to all of their customers about the status of their previous products, and if they are not compliant, how to fix them. And in particular, we're hoping that they will all help us reach out to small and medium-sized organizations to provide technical support.
Spring Valley, New York, for John Koskinen. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Morning.
As usual, very informative show. I've been watching since 7 a.m. Maybe I've missed the point that I'm about to make. The previous guests all have been talking about the repercussions and implications of the problem in general terms. In fact, sometimes even in nebulous terms. Mr. Koskinen seems to be getting very close to most of us who do not know much about computer. Can we start at ground zero and please walk us through a one-case scenario? Let's say we have a problem with with a Social Security. I know this, you guys have been working on that, but we receive a check the first of the year of 2000. What is the problem with that check if the problem is not fixed with the computer?
All right, well, let's suppose it's a payroll check. As I say, I think the Social Security checks will all come out on time, but let's assume it's a payroll check. The first problem you'll have with whoever sends that check is their system has to be able to recognize and deal with the year 2000 so it can actually produce the check and make the calculation according to the hours worked or other pay elements, including deductions, and produce that check and send it to you. Assuming that happens, so in some cases, if they don't solve that problem, the computer simply will not be able to produce an accurate check or perhaps any check at all. If you then get a check, in some small percentage of cases, it's possible. I think most banks will be in good shape, but in some cases, you'll take that check to a bank and they will have trouble processing it because as they go put that money into your account, either their immediate systems will not work or they'll have trouble corresponding technically with data exchanges to the clearing banks, and the banks that cause the money to go from into your account and be charged to the account of your employer, which is probably in another bank. So what will happen is that as a general matter, if everyone's systems can't work in what we call an end-to-end basis, that is you do the work, your company's computers do the proper calculations, you get paid a check, the check gets issued to you, you put it into your bank then deposits the money into your fund and debits the account of your employer who is in another bank, so that information has to go to that bank and it all gets cleared through the Federal Reserve. So that's basically the risk, is that even if one of those systems along the way works well and the others don't, you could have a holdup in the transaction. It might take you several days to actually get the transaction completed rather than instantaneously. So that's our problem. Our problem is everybody has to be compliant in the same way at the same time.
Where does the name Koskinen come from?
Koskinen's a Finnish name. My grandparents, actually on both sides, came from Finland and immigrated to this country.
And say it the right way.
It's Koskinen. You've been doing well.
Well, I'll tell you, we've had you on several times. It's right. Tough because somebody will throw, mispronounce it and it throws you off. It's a Finnish name.
Finnish name.
Terry, Montana, go ahead, please.
Yes, this problem is I don't think is unique. I mean, we've got dates in computers back, 1898, and when 1998 rolled around, that was 100 years. There's information in computers that were dated 1897, and when 1997 rolled around, we didn't have a flop. What's the problem here with this 2000 kick?
Well, actually, other than people who were born before the century, of whom there are not as many now, those problems were problems, but they were dealt with episodically as they occurred. And in fact, the reason some financial organizations, including Social Security, are ahead of the game is they discovered early on that they couldn't make the transition, either because they looked back to someone who had a birthday in the 1890s and it was difficult to calculate, or because they were looking forward. In Social Security's case, they discovered in 1989 that as they did actuarial calculations moving across 2000, that the computers couldn't handle it. So the point is the same difficulty existed in the transition from 1899 to 1900, but of course nobody was using computers then, and by the time we got to be very active in terms of computers in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, most of the transactions were in the two-digit range and were not a difficult problem. But there were some. They've just been solved independently and on their own. Now we're going to have to solve it for everyone.
10 minutes left in our special on Y2K. Washington, Indiana, you're next.
I'm just very happy that the Office of Management and Budget is tagging the Defense Department for one of their long-standing methods of handling a problem. My particular problem dated back to the Second World War, although I had a specialty number as a pathologist, I was a combat area physician starting on D1 on Omaha Beach. And at the time when the Battle of the Bulge was over, we got a message that they were wanting to find out specialists in the field. So I filled out a paper, and then I proceeded to cross the Rhine on a pontoon bridge since Remagen had fallen in. And finally, when I ended up in East Germany, I got a reply, and their solution to the problem of the specialist in the field in my instance was they changed my number to general physician.
All right, sir, thanks. Let's just accept that and go to Henderson, Nevada next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I want to know something about what's going to happen to the banking institution in the year 2000. And number two, I attended last year a speech by Henry Kissinger and Associates, and Brzezinski was involved, etc., at the Manila Hotel. I want to know why this man is preaching one world government and new world order.
John Koskinen?
Well, I'm not the expert on one world government speeches, so it's not in my area, so I can't discuss that with you. But in terms of financial institutions, in some ways we have more confidence about where the banks will be domestically because, of course, we have direct federal oversight of banks with the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And those regulators have been working together for well over a year in terms of designing examinations of banks and making sure that the banks are paying appropriate attention to this problem and providing the necessary resources. And their last reports note that close to 90% of all the banks they've examined, and they've examined them all, are making good progress towards solving this problem. There are about 5% of the banks examined that they think are at some risk, although they think that there's enough time left that they may be able to remediate the issue. So as a general matter, I think that domestically, it appears that in the range of 95% of the financial institutions of this country should not have a problem at all, and the other 5% may or may not, depending upon how much work they can get done. On the other hand, we are very concerned about international financial transactions because many countries of the world have not yet paid sufficient attention to this problem, and we're concerned that we will not be able to continue to engage in the effective and efficient international commerce that's gone on and that this country depends upon. But coming back to the basic issue here, while everyone is still working, no bank is done yet, so we can't give any guarantees about it. I think that the basic financial institutions that we oversee and monitor are going to be in pretty good shape.
I want to ask you about the politics of Al Gore in this issue in a moment. Shreve, Ohio, you're next.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Koskinen.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Yeah, I was calling about the problem and just kind of wondering, worst case scenario with the idea of the power grids. With I have a friend of mine in California that works on a small power company, and of course they're online with the bigger grids. What happens if some of these smaller power companies go offline and they're not compliant, and it causes some of the the large power grids to come also overload and come down? Worst case scenario, if we're off for say 2 weeks.
John Koskinen?
Well, it is one of the issues that we're focused on with the industry, and that is that the power grids, and there are 4 of them in this country, depend upon a whole series of companies being able to provide power. With the small companies, while it would be a drag on the grid, they by themselves would not bring the grids down so that no one had power. What would happen would be what happens oftentimes in bad storms. In other words, power is off for a while the load is reallocated. People may be asked in some circumstances, in some areas, to not use power in certain times of the day. Industry may be told that it can't have power for a few days, but the grids themselves at this point look like it's unlikely that they would all go down, or any one of them would go down for any long period of time as a result of a small company failure. But if enough small companies fail, there clearly will be some disruptions for a short period of time, could be a number of days, while the power demands and sources are reallocated across that grid.
Neil Monroe, in his National Journal piece in June of this year, has a winners and loser column. And he says winners in this, the year 2000 problem. Senator Robert Kerry, who will tell presidential primary voters that he tried while Al Gore slept. And then he has a loser on the other side, Vice President Al Gore, who fretted about global warming, legal authorities, and campaign finance laws while missing the biggest technology problem facing the country. And in all the articles we read about this problem where you're involved, they say that you're working very closely with the Vice President. What do you think of the politics of all this?
Well, the politics will be, I think anybody in Washington is probably not going to be in great shape if we have major disruptions into the year 2000, which is why, as a general matter, as Steve Horn said and others, we've gotten very good cooperation, because this is not viewed generally as a political issue.
While computer experts had known about the Y2K bug since the 1960s, it wasn't until the 1990s that their fears became increasingly public.
I mean, this is the biggest, dumbest, stupidest, most idiotic blunder in the history of technology.
See that YY right there? That's the year in 2 digits. 1998 reads only as 98 to a computer chip.
Come the year 2000, many computers will assume 00 means the year 1900, back to the future.
Programmers only used 2 digits for 2 reasons. One, they didn't have a lot of memory space for their programs, and secondly, they never imagined their software would last as long as it did.
We got specifics today on how ill-prepared America's computers are for the year 2000.
Today, a Senate panel reported that up to 40% of the country could be hit by power failures on New Year's 2000 because computers get confused.
You wouldn't want to be in an airplane, you wouldn't want to be in an elevator, and you wouldn't want to be in a hospital.
There's a significant risk, a 40% risk, of a global recession.
By 1998, President Bill Clinton moved to quell the fears by creating a Council on Year 2000 Conversion. He put John Koskinen, a high-level government administrator, in charge.
The cry went up from the Hill that the administration was not paying enough attention, there was not a coordinated effort, and there needed to be somebody in control. I only halfway facetiously said the president gave me an office, an assistant, and said, don't let the world stop. We knew finance and telecommunication systems were going to be the ones most at risk. But also, the FAA had a legitimate problem. IBM sent them a letter that said, these systems won't work when the transition comes, and there's no way to fix them. The Social Security had 50 million lines of code. It's a mind-boggling number to think about, and that was replicated.
Embedded computer chips in everything, from VCRs to power plants, were also thought to be vulnerable.
The life of this baby depends on computer chips. They are embedded in the machines that monitor his heart rate. And the question is, will they work on January 1st, 2000?
On the nightly news, reporters scrambled to translate the scale of the problem into simple terms.
Imagine someone told you had to find and replace every bolt in the Brooklyn Bridge. That's daunting, but doable. Now imagine you have to find and replace every bolt in every bridge in America and then the world. And you only have 21 months to do it.
The easy-to-understand risk was the system stops. The more insidious risk was, and that's what worried people about their bank accounts, is the system keeps running, it's just got bad data. The fix to the code was fairly simple. You just had to go through, and every place it said 2 digits, you had to give it instructions to say 4.
But pouring through reams of old software code to find each and every date reference was a labor-intensive process.
We simply did not have enough programmers in the United States who could do this. One of the surprises of the Y2K problem was it gave a boost to outsourcing software work to India.
We were becoming increasingly interconnected, so fixing just part of the problem wasn't going to help you if everybody else wasn't fixing their part of the problem. So on the one hand, you'd like to declare a national emergency to make sure that small, medium-sized companies, everybody in the supply chain pays attention. But the minute you do that, you're going to panic the public.
The Millennium Bug will affect every business in the UK.
In the spring of '99, the British put out a big public warning.
If you rely on any form of technology,
This issue affects you.
It was always a concern to me that the panic would spread. Because once you start warning people and scaring them, it's a little hard to get them off the ledge.
By the fall of 1999, Koskinen was promoting a different message. He was sure that his team would successfully orchestrate a fix for the Y2K bug.
Are you really confident that you are all ready?
We're confident that the basic infrastructure of the United States is going to function effectively.
But by the time Koskinen got the message out, the American psyche had already been invaded by another kind of bug.
The bug in our cultural software, our beliefs about the millennium, were much more serious than the technical problem.
This is usually a slow time for Hinkley Springs, but not this year. Their retail business doubled, and delivery to homes and offices up 30%.
The risk by the last 6 months of '99 was there'd be a run on the bank, there'd be a run on gas, there'd be a run on food. That was as big a concern for us as anything.
Surf through the internet these days and you keep coming across a strange new word, Teyotawaki. The word stands for the end of the world as we know it.
That's a sound that gets your attention real quick.
By the fall of 1999, news stories reported a spike in gun sales. Scammers preying on a confused public.
He said, yeah, I'm calling from Bank Boston, and I need to get decals mailed to you so you can put them on your credit card or they won't work after Y2K.
And survivalists taking extreme measures in anticipation of the millennium.
Gary North has his own natural gas well. He says it's his ticket for survival.
That cheers me up.
And for thousands of Americans, the millennium evoked fears of a coming apocalypse.
I believe that Y2K may be God's instrument to shake this nation, humble this nation, awaken this nation, and from this nation, start revival that spreads the face of the earth before the rapture of the church.
American society has a very deep well of belief in the imminent end of the world. And the 3 zeros triggered all of that. everybody saw in the Y2K tea leaves whatever it is they wanted to see.
2, 1, happy 2000!
The arrival of Y2K did not bring the much anticipated and feared computer meltdown. It appears to have been more of a prankster than a real problem.
Things couldn't be going more smoothly. So smoothly, some are even asking if all that preparing was necessary.
Certainly the flu bug has affected us much more than the Y2K bug, which I think is probably non-existent.
You never get credit for the disasters you avert, especially if you're a programmer and nobody understands what you're doing to begin with.
We have sort of a lack of confidence that things can get done. People did not grasp the magnitude of the effort. The easier thing to keep in your mind was all that noise about it and nothing happened. It must have just been a hoax.
The Senate's final report on Y2K found that government and industry did successfully avert a crisis at an estimated cost of $100 billion. But was the response excessive? One research group estimated that government and industry overspent by nearly 30%.
My answer to people who said, well, they wasted a lot of money was the number of things that happened that went wrong, that fortunately were around the edges, demonstrated that if you didn't fix the systems, it wouldn't work automatically.
There were some minor glitches after Y2K, but it turned out not everything needed to be fixed, including most embedded chips. Looking back on Y2K today, Koskinen sees enduring value in the systems put into place to prepare for the worst-case scenario.
When 9/11 hit on that Tuesday, financial markets were able to open the following Monday because in 1998 and 99, they had developed tests and scripts for testing all the interconnections and all the trade data between all of the major players. Without that ability to test systems and make sure that the markets and every transaction could open and close with all of the counterparties, it would have been weeks before the financial markets would have been able to comfortably open.
We have little Y2Ks happening all the time. Technologies are always created for one reason, but end up being used for an application that the creator could never imagine.
Your U.S. tour dates take you almost up to New Year's Eve. What are your New Year's Eve plans?
Well, I can answer that question for you. And what are we doing on New Year's Eve?
I don't know. What are you doing on New Year's Eve now?
We'll be hiding somewhere.
In a bomb shelter.
I'll be at
dig
all
your
money
all around a hole and jump in there and put dirt over it.
I'm going to go to the bank and ask for all the money in quarters and nickels.
Like, give me all my money.
Can I have that in nickels and quarters?
We haven't really decided yet, but
we'd like to be home.
We might be just resting because we've been working every year for the past 6 years, so we're probably just going to chill with the family in case the world ends or something.
You know, we're very optimistic. So.
In case everything just goes,
everything's cool.
Blows up, meteor, you know. Okay, AJ.
I'm going to be surrounded by people that I love and in a nice warm climate, and whatever happens, happens.
No, I haven't got caught up in the hype about the millennium and all that. I'm just living day by day. I mean, I don't want to be in an airplane when 12 o'clock comes New Year's Eve. You know, who knows what's going to happen with these computers, man.
You won't be able to get your money for like 2 weeks. You know, I think bank records will come back online, but there might be confusion. You know, I wouldn't want to be in a crowded city, but I don't think that any, you know, I think planes will fly. Because worse comes to worse, the Army will come in and fly them.
I'm not sure I really want to be traveling anywhere. Like I'm a little bit concerned about that whole Y2K flying air traffic control thing. So I might just want to be somewhere with like a lot of canned goods just in case.
I was just talking to my mommy this morning on the phone, and she's telling me all this. She's like, don't get in an elevator. That's like her word. She's like, you're not allowed to get in an elevator. So I was like, okay, mommy, I'll stay away from that one. But, you know, planes, the whole bit, you know, money. She's like, I think she's like stocking food for the next 2 years.
He wants to be on a commercial jet at midnight, flying like over the dateline or something. I don't know. Yeah, right. I like that one.
You know, I think what's going to happen when it hits midnight in year 2000, it's going to be like the whole world watching the odometer roll over on their car at 10,000 miles. It's going to be like, cool, 2000.
But what if
I'm still going to be ugly, I'm still going to be disgusting, and I'm still not going to have any friends.
Yeah, and that's the biggest Y2K problem. That it's not the computers or anything, it's Mark being ugly and not having friends.
It hasn't made that great of an impact on me, other than I think people feel the need to define a generation around the end of it, or a decade, say, at the end of it. And I'm sure, and I guess I do too. Like I was looking at the credits of the record in 1999. Wow, that's weird. You know? I'm not that overly concerned about it, though.
Do you have any concerns about like all these talks about Y2K and millennium bugs and?
Whatever. You know what I'm saying? I mean, can we control it? Is it something we can stop? Just push a button? I can't worry about things that's out of my control. You know what I'm saying? Things that's in my control that I can alter. You know, I try to alter it if it's potentially dangerous to me. Things that I have no control of, I can't do anything about. Whatever happens, man, we see.
This hand and this hand, go like this, close your eyes.